On the morning of November 7th, 1942, the waters northeast of Guadalcanal lay shrouded in darkness, so complete that Captain Takeo Kurita could barely see his own hand extended before his face. Standing on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Chokai, he watched the invisible horizon with the confidence of a man who had spent 23 years mastering the art of nocturnal naval warfare. The Imperial Japanese Navy had trained for night engagements since the early 1920s, developing tactics, equipment, and a doctrine that made them unquestionably superior in darkness. Around him, a formation of 2 battleships, 4 cruisers, and 14 destroyers moved through the Black Pacific waters with practiced precision, their crews prepared for what they believed would be another demonstration of Japanese naval supremacy. Captain Kurita allowed himself a slight smile as he considered the American forces somewhere ahead in the darkness. "The Americans will never see us," he thought, echoing a sentiment shared throughout the fleet. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Captain Kurita and thousands of Japanese sailors could not have imagined was that at that very moment, American radar operators were watching glowing green dots on their screens that represented every ship in the Japanese formation, tracking their speed, bearing, and distance with an accuracy that would have seemed like sorcery just 5 years earlier. The contrast between what the Japanese expected and what actually awaited them that night would fundamentally alter naval warfare forever, proving that the era of battleship guns and visual sighting was ending, replaced by an age where invisible electromagnetic waves determined victory before the first shot was fired. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Nakamura, serving aboard the destroyer Akatsuki, had been at sea since 1937. He had participated in operations from the China coast to the Philippines, and he took immense pride in his crew's ability to operate in complete darkness. Japanese optical equipment was genuinely superior at this point in the conflict. Their Type 93 long-lance torpedoes could strike targets from distances exceeding 40,000 meters, and their crews had practiced night recognition until they could identify ship silhouettes in starlight. The Americans, Nakamura believed based on his experience, were clumsy in darkness, dependent on searchlights that announced their positions long before they could effectively engage. Standing beside Nakamura was Ensign Ichiro Yamada, a recent graduate of the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy at Itajima. Yamada had studied the accounts of earlier night engagements near Guadalcanal, particularly the encounters off Savo Island in August, where Japanese forces had achieved devastating results against Allied ships. Those battles had reinforced everything the Academy had taught him about Japanese tactical superiority in nocturnal conditions. As the young ensign scanned the darkness ahead, he felt the particular mixture of nervousness and confidence that comes from believing your training has prepared you for exactly this moment. Unknown to Nakamura, Yamada, and their thousands of comrades steaming through the darkness, the American ships they were approaching had been tracking them for more than an hour. Aboard the light cruiser Atlanta, radar operator second class Robert Henderson sat before a Type SG surface search radar display, watching the distinct echoes of the Japanese formation appear as clear blips on his screen. Henderson had been trained on radar for only 7 months, part of the Navy's desperate rush to equip sailors with skills for technology that was evolving almost weekly. The SG radar that Henderson operated was a revelation in naval warfare. Operating at a frequency of 3,000 megahertz with a wavelength of 10 centimeters, it could detect surface targets at ranges exceeding 30,000 meters in good conditions. More importantly, it provided relatively accurate bearing and range information that could be fed directly to gun directors, allowing American ships to target enemies they could not yet see. Henderson methodically reported contacts to the Combat Information Center, his voice steady despite the knowledge that each blip represented a warship carrying hundreds or thousands of men toward a confrontation that would determine control of Guadalcanal. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger, serving on the operations staff of Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan, reviewed the radar reports with growing clarity about the tactical situation. The information arriving from multiple ships equipped with the SG radar was creating a comprehensive picture of enemy movements. Moosbrugger could see that the Japanese formation was approaching in a column, could estimate their speed at approximately 24 knots, and could predict where they would be in 10, 15, or 20 minutes. This kind of situational awareness had been completely impossible just 2 years earlier. The technology that enabled this awareness had emerged from British research conducted at the Telecommunications Research Establishment, combined with American industrial capacity to manufacture radar sets in quantities the British could never achieve. By November 1942, the United States was producing radar equipment at rates that astounded even American planners. The Radiation Laboratory at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology coordinated research involving thousands of scientists and engineers. Production facilities from General Electric to Bell Laboratories were manufacturing components and complete systems. While Japanese industry struggled to equip even flagship vessels with basic radar sets, American production lines were creating dozens of advanced systems weekly. Captain Kurita, still confident in the darkness that concealed his force, had no comprehension of how thoroughly American technology had penetrated that darkness. Japanese naval intelligence had reported that Americans possessed radar, but the assessment remained that it was primitive, unreliable, and unlikely to provide significant tactical advantage in a night engagement. This assessment was based partly on captured equipment from earlier in the conflict and partly on an institutional blindness that could not imagine American technology advancing so rapidly. The Japanese Navy had invested decades in perfecting visual sighting techniques, superior optics, and crew training for darkness operations. The idea that this entire investment could be rendered obsolete by electronic equipment seemed, to many Japanese officers, unlikely to the point of impossibility. Ensign Yamada, his eyes straining to detect any sign of the enemy in the darkness ahead, felt the Akatsuki increase speed slightly. The formation was arranging itself for what Japanese doctrine called the decisive encounter, the moment when superior Japanese training and equipment would devastate an American force that, according to intelligence estimates, would be surprised and unprepared. Yamada checked his watch, noting the time was approaching 1:30 in the morning. Within minutes, he believed, searchlights would illuminate American ships, torpedoes would launch, and the battle would demonstrate once again the wisdom of traditional Japanese naval doctrine. Aboard the American destroyer Fletcher, Lieutenant James Armstrong watched his own radar display, showing the approaching Japanese force with crystal clarity. Armstrong had participated in earlier engagements where American forces had fought without radar, depending on visual sighting in conditions where Japanese optical superiority had given them critical advantages. The difference now was extraordinary. Instead of peering into darkness hoping to spot an enemy ship before it spotted him, Armstrong could see the range closing precisely. 40,000 meters, 35,000 meters, 30,000 meters. The Japanese were approaching exactly as radar tracking predicted. The technological gap extended beyond radar itself to the integration of radar data with fire control systems. American ships were increasingly equipped with Mark 8 fire control radar that could track targets and provide continuous firing solutions even when those targets remained invisible to human observers. The system could compensate for ship movement, target movement, and even predict where a target would be by the time shells arrived after their flight time through the air. Japanese fire control, despite its sophistication in other areas, had nothing comparable. As the range closed to 20,000 meters, the American formation received orders to prepare for engagement. Gun crews who had been standing ready moved to full alert status. Fire control radars locked onto targets designated by the surface search radar. Directors calculated firing solutions using electronic data rather than visual observation. The Americans were preparing to shoot at enemies they had never seen with their own eyes, trusting completely in the electronic systems that promised accurate targeting in complete darkness. Captain Kurita sensed the moment for action approaching. His formation had reached what he calculated was the optimal position relative to where American ships should be located based on the last intelligence reports. He gave the order for searchlights to illuminate, expecting to see American vessels caught unprepared in the sudden glare. easy targets for Japanese guns and torpedoes, already trained on where the searchlight beams would reveal them. The searchlights blazed into the darkness, powerful beams stabbing across the water. But instead of catching surprised Americans, the lights revealed something Captain Kurita had not anticipated. The American ships were already in battle formation, their guns already trained toward the Japanese vessels, clearly prepared for engagement. Even as Kurita processed this unexpected sight, the American ships opened fire. The first salvos arrived with devastating accuracy. Shells that had been aimed using radar data struck near the Japanese vessels, even before Japanese optical sights could fully register the American positions. Ensign Yamada felt the Akatsuki shudder as near misses threw up enormous columns of water. The young ensign's confidence evaporated as he realized the Americans had been ready, had somehow known the Japanese were coming, had prepared for this encounter in ways that contradicted everything he had learned about American capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Nakamura, more experienced than Yamada, recognized immediately that something unprecedented was happening. American ships were shooting with accuracy that should not be possible in these conditions. The traditional Japanese advantage in night fighting had somehow disappeared. Nakamura barked orders to his gun crews, trying to acquire targets and return fire. But the Americans had achieved surprise despite being the force that should have been surprised. Aboard the Atlanta, radar operator Henderson continued tracking targets, calling out range and bearing information that fed into fire control solutions. The radar showed Japanese ships beginning evasive maneuvers, their formations disrupting as they reacted to the American fire. Henderson had trained for months on equipment that his instructors admitted was so new that they were learning alongside the students. Now that training was proving its value in the most direct possible way. The green blips on his screen represented real ships, real enemies, and the information he provided was helping American guns find those enemies in darkness that would have protected them just months earlier. Commander Moosbrugger monitored reports flowing into the Combat Information Center and recognized that the engagement was demonstrating the revolutionary nature of radar-directed naval combat. Japanese ships were responding with their own fire, and their gunnery remained formidable once they had visual targets. But the Americans had seized an initiative that Japanese doctrine had always assumed would belong to them. The hunter had become the hunted, not through superior seamanship or optical equipment, but through technology that operated in a realm beyond human vision. The battle evolved into a chaotic, close-range engagement as distances collapsed and both sides fought with guns, torpedoes, and determination. Japanese crews demonstrated the skill and courage that had made them feared throughout the Pacific. American crews showed their own courage and increasing competence. But throughout the engagement, American radar continued providing information that Japanese forces simply could not match. When Japanese ships attempted to disengage and reform in darkness, radar tracked them. When they tried to approach from unexpected angles, radar detected the movement. The invisibility that Captain Kurita had counted on as a fundamental advantage had been stripped away by technology he had not imagined could be so effective. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the engagement concluded with both sides having suffered damage and casualties. The tactical outcome was debatable, depending on how one measured success, but the strategic implications were unmistakable. The era of Japanese dominance in night naval combat had ended. American technology had negated years of Japanese training and doctrine development. Captain Kurita, surveying the damage to his force and considering the unexpected American capabilities he had encountered, understood that something fundamental had changed in naval warfare. Ensign Yamada, exhausted and shaken, tried to comprehend what he had experienced. The battle had contradicted everything his instructors at Itajima had taught him about American limitations. The enemy had seen in darkness, had shot accurately without visual sighting, had demonstrated capabilities that seemed impossible. As the Akatsuki withdrew with the rest of the Japanese force, Yamada wondered what other surprises American technology might reveal in future engagements. Lieutenant Commander Nakamura wrote in his patrol report that the Americans appeared to possess detection equipment of unexpected effectiveness. His report filtered up through the Japanese naval command structure joined other reports describing similar American capabilities, but the institutional response remained inadequate. Japanese industry lacked the capacity to match American radar production. Japanese doctrine had invested too heavily in traditional methods to pivot quickly to electronic warfare. The recognition that Americans had achieved technological superiority in this critical area came without the industrial and technical capacity to respond effectively. The contrast between Japanese and American technological development extended far beyond radar itself to the entire industrial and scientific infrastructure supporting the war effort. The radiation laboratory at MIT employed more scientists working on radar than the entire Japanese military-industrial complex could mobilize. American universities, corporations, and government laboratories collaborated with an efficiency that Japanese parallel systems could not replicate. When American researchers identified an improvement to radar performance, that improvement could be incorporated into production sets within weeks. Japanese improvements, when achieved, took months to implement and produced equipment in quantities too small to affect the broader conflict. Robert Henderson, the radar operator who had tracked the Japanese formation so effectively, received a commendation for his performance during the engagement. More significantly, his experience contributed to training programs that would prepare thousands of additional radar operators as American production delivered more and more sets to the fleet. Henderson would participate in multiple subsequent engagements where radar provided critical advantages, and he would survive the conflict to become an instructor, teaching post-war radar operations. His journey from civilian to trained radar operator in just 7 months illustrated the speed with which America could transform technical innovation into tactical capability. The SG radar that had revealed the Japanese force continued to evolve throughout the conflict. Improvements in resolution, range, and reliability appeared in successive production runs. By 1944, American ships carried radar systems so sophisticated that they could detect individual aircraft at high altitude, track multiple surface contacts simultaneously, and provide fire control data of extraordinary precision. Japanese equivalents, when they existed, remained inferior in performance and availability. The technological gap that had appeared manageable in early 1942 had widened into a chasm by mid-1944. Captain Kurita survived the engagement northeast of Guadalcanal and continued serving in the Imperial Japanese Navy throughout the conflict. He participated in subsequent battles where American radar superiority became even more pronounced. By 1944, when Kurita commanded forces during the Philippines campaign, American radar had evolved to the point where Japanese formations could be detected, tracked, and engaged at ranges that made traditional optical sighting almost irrelevant. The confident assertion that Americans would never see Japanese ships in darkness, which had seemed so reasonable in November 1942, had become tragically obsolete. The human cost of this technological revolution appeared in casualty figures and sunken ships. Japanese sailors, trained extensively and motivated by deep commitment to their service, found themselves fighting an enemy who could see them when they could not see back. The psychological impact of this asymmetry was profound. Sailors who had trained for years to operate effectively in darkness discovered that darkness no longer protected them. The fundamental assumptions underlying Japanese naval doctrine had been invalidated by American technology, and the resulting cognitive dissonance contributed to declining morale throughout the Japanese fleet. Ensign Yamada continued his service until August 1945, participating in multiple engagements where Japanese forces faced American opponents equipped with increasingly sophisticated radar and fire control systems. He survived the conflict and returned to Japan, where he eventually wrote a memoir describing his experiences. In that memoir, Yamada identified the engagement northeast of Guadalcanal in November 1942 as the moment when he first understood that Japan was fighting an opponent with industrial and technological capabilities that could not be matched. The confident young ensign who had believed in Japanese tactical superiority became a reflective veteran who recognized that superior training and courage could not overcome the material advantages that American industry provided to its forces. The broader implications of radar technology extended beyond individual engagements to the fundamental nature of naval warfare. For centuries, naval combat had depended on visual sighting, with battles occurring at ranges determined by how far human eyes could see and accurately direct gunfire. Radar shattered these limitations, enabling detection and engagement at ranges limited only by the equipment's technical capabilities and the curvature of the Earth. Ships could now fight effectively in darkness, fog, or storms that previously would have prevented engagement. The tactical and strategic possibilities expanded enormously, favoring the side with superior radar technology and the doctrine to exploit it effectively. American naval doctrine evolved rapidly to incorporate radar capabilities. Procedures for radar-directed gunnery, fighter direction, and fleet coordination developed through practice and analysis of actual combat performance. The Navy established schools specifically for radar operation and maintenance. Technical manuals multiplied as new equipment entered service. The organizational adaptation to radar technology proceeded with impressive speed, driven by recognition that this technology provided advantages too significant to allow slow bureaucratic processes to delay implementation. Japanese efforts to respond to American radar superiority faced obstacles both technical and organizational. Japanese radar research had progressed during the 1930s, producing functional equipment, but the industrial capacity to manufacture radar sets in large quantities did not exist. Japanese electronics production focused on creating small numbers of high-quality sets rather than the mass production approach that American industry employed. When Japanese ships did receive radar equipment, maintenance proved challenging because trained technicians were scarce and replacement parts often unavailable. The systemic differences between Japanese and American industrial organization meant that even when Japanese researchers developed capable radar designs, those designs could not be translated into fleet-wide equipment as American designs were. The economic dimensions of this technology gap reflected broader disparities between American and Japanese industrial capacity. The United States in 1942 was producing more electrical power than the rest of the world combined. American factories manufactured more electronics, more precision instruments, more of virtually every category of industrial product than Japanese factories could match. When the United States decided to produce thousands of radar sets, American industry accomplished this while simultaneously producing tanks, aircraft, ships, and weapons in quantities that overwhelmed Axis production. Japan, fighting a war across millions of square kilometers of ocean and land, could not match this production even in specific categories of critical equipment. Lieutenant James Armstrong, the destroyer officer who had monitored radar displays during the engagement, advanced through subsequent ranks as the conflict continued. He participated in the development of tactical procedures for radar-directed combat and contributed to training programs for newly commissioned officers. Armstrong's experience illustrated how quickly the Navy was building institutional knowledge about radar employment. Officers who had graduated from the Naval Academy in 1941 with minimal radar education were becoming radar experts by 1943, learning through combat experience and sharing that knowledge through formal and informal channels. The radiation laboratory at MIT, which had contributed so significantly to radar development, expanded throughout the conflict to address increasingly sophisticated challenges. Researchers worked on airborne intercept radar, gun-laying radar, navigation systems, and countermeasures against enemy radar. The laboratory's work intersected with British research, particularly the British efforts to develop centimetric radar using cavity magnetron technology. This transatlantic collaboration accelerated progress for both nations, while Japan's relative isolation from scientific collaboration with advanced industrial powers left Japanese research comparatively limited. By 1943, American aircraft carriers operated with radar-directed fighter controllers who could vector interceptors toward incoming Japanese aircraft, while those aircraft were still dozens of kilometers away. The fighter direction systems combined radar detection with radio communication and tactical doctrine, creating an integrated air defense network that Japanese forces found nearly impossible to penetrate. Japanese pilots who had achieved significant successes earlier in the conflict encountered American defenses that detected them early, directed fighters to intercept them efficiently, and coordinated anti-aircraft fire using radar ranging. The casualty rates among Japanese aircrew climbed as American technology multiplied the effectiveness of American defensive systems. The transformation of naval warfare through radar represented one component of a broader technological revolution that characterized the entire conflict. Proximity fuses, sonar improvements, encrypted communications, and numerous other innovations emerged from Allied research laboratories and entered service with remarkable speed. The cumulative effect of these innovations was to make combat increasingly asymmetric, favoring the side with superior technology, even when that side's personnel might be less experienced or individually less skilled than their opponents. Commander Moosbrugger, analyzing the engagement and subsequent battles, contributed to tactical publications that disseminated lessons about radar employment throughout the fleet. His writings emphasized that radar was not simply a detection tool, but a weapon system that required integration with fire control, communications, and maneuver doctrine. The American Navy institutionalized this integration through revised tactical manuals, training programs, and equipment procurement decisions. By war's end, no American naval officer could achieve command without demonstrating competence in radar-directed operations. The specific engagement northeast of Guadalcanal in November 1942 has been analyzed extensively by naval historians as a pivotal moment when American technological advantages became undeniably clear. While earlier battles had shown hints of American radar capabilities, this engagement demonstrated those capabilities against a Japanese force that entered combat confident in its traditional superiority. The psychological impact on Japanese naval personnel was significant. Subsequent Japanese operations increasingly reflected caution born from recognition that Americans possessed detection capabilities that could negate Japanese advantages in other areas. Captain Kurita's smile of confidence on that dark November morning, his certainty that Americans would never see his approaching force, became a symbol of the gap between Japanese expectations and American reality. That gap would widen throughout the remaining years of conflict as American technology continued advancing, while Japanese capabilities stagnated or declined. By 1945, the Imperial Japanese Navy that had entered the conflict as a formidable force with legitimate claims to excellence had been reduced to scattered remnants, undone not primarily by lack of courage or skill, but by an opponent whose industrial and technological superiority proved overwhelming. The sailors on both sides of that November engagement were men doing their duty as they understood it, serving their countries with the courage and commitment that has always characterized military service. The outcome was determined not by their individual qualities, but by decisions made in research laboratories, production facilities, and government offices far from the dark waters where they fought. The green blips on radar screens represented not just ships, but the accumulated advantages of industrial capacity, scientific research, and organizational effectiveness that determined the conflict's ultimate outcome. Robert Henderson, the radar operator whose steady reporting had contributed to American tactical success, never thought of himself as a hero. He considered himself a technician doing a job, following training and procedures that others had developed. But Henderson and thousands of operators like him were the human element that made technology effective. The radar sets required trained personnel to operate them, maintain them, and interpret the information they provided. American success in radar warfare reflected not just superior equipment, but superior training systems that could take civilians and transform them into competent operators in months. The post-war analysis of radar's impact on naval warfare influenced decades of subsequent naval development. Every major navy invested heavily in radar technology and doctrine. The lessons learned during the conflict about integrating sensors with weapons, about training operators, about maintaining complex electronics under combat conditions, shaped naval planning through the Cold War and beyond. The engagement northeast of Guadalcanal where Japanese confidence met American technology, became a case study in how technological innovation can revolutionize warfare, rendering obsolete skills and tactics that had been perfected over decades. Ensign Yamada's journey from confident young officer to reflective veteran mirrored Japan's broader experience in the conflict. The nation that had entered combat believing in its spiritual and tactical superiority learned through bitter experience that industrial capacity and technological innovation could overcome those advantages. The lesson was painful, purchased with hundreds of thousands of lives and years of suffering. But it fundamentally reshaped Japanese understanding of modern warfare and Japan's place in the world. The families of sailors lost in this engagement and throughout the conflict mourned their dead regardless of nationality. The widows and orphans created by naval combat suffered losses that no technological advantage could compensate for or justify. The human cost of the conflict extended far beyond those who served, touching millions of civilians whose lives were disrupted, damaged, or destroyed by decisions made by governments they could not control. The radar technology that gave Americans advantages in specific engagements was, from this perspective, simply another tool of destruction in a war that brought misery to vast numbers of people. Yet within the tragedy, the technological developments driven by wartime necessity also produced innovations that benefited humanity in peacetime. Radar technology, developed for detecting ships and aircraft, became the foundation for air traffic control systems, weather forecasting, and countless civilian applications. The research methodologies, the collaboration between university scientists and military planners, the rapid translation of laboratory discoveries into practical applications, all these aspects of wartime radar development influenced post-war science and technology development in ways that extended far beyond military applications. The engagement that began with Captain Kurita's confident smile concluded with a changed understanding of naval warfare's nature. The darkness that had protected Japanese forces became transparent to American radar. The training that had given Japanese crews confidence became insufficient against opponents who could see electronically what human eyes could not detect. The decades of doctrinal development became obsolete in the face of technology that operated by completely different principles. And the outcome of this single engagement foreshadowed the broader outcome of the conflict, where American industrial and technological advantages would ultimately prove decisive against opponents whose courage and skill could not overcome material disadvantages. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.